The alien princess considered her human husband harmless until his true power emerged. Part 1. The Treaty of Small Things. The station smelled like recycled air and cold metal, the way every deep space station did. Aaron Cole stood near the observation window and looked out at the stars. He was 34 years old, average height for a human, with short brown hair and hands that were slightly rough from years of work aboard Navy vessels. He wore his coalition dress uniform, which had been pressed that morning by someone who clearly cared more about appearances than he did. He was calm. He was always calm. Behind him, the room was full of noise. Diplomats in long coats moved between tables covered in papers and data pads. Translators whispered into earpieces. Advisors argued quietly with each other near the refreshment table. The station, Mirador 9, a neutral platform floating between human and Vealthari space, had been prepared for this moment for over a year. Every surface had been cleaned twice. Every light had been adjusted. Everything was ready for the joining of two civilizations through one marriage. Aaron picked up a glass of water, drank half of it, and kept looking at the stars. He had been told about the Vealthari for most of his adult life. Everyone had. They were the reason humanity had pushed its space program into overdrive 40 years ago, back when the first contact signal had arrived from deep space, and governments around the world had spent 3 sleepless weeks arguing about what it meant. The Vealthari were old. Their civilization was older than written human history. They were tall, some reaching 8 feet or more, with long limbs and skin that shifted color the way a human face shifted expression. They spoke in 2 ways at once, with their mouths using a structured spoken language, and with the bioluminescent patterns that moved across their skin like slow lightning. To speak to a Vealthari and only use words was to them like only hearing half a conversation. The treaty had taken 9 years to negotiate. Humanity had made mistakes early on. Small ones, mostly about tone and gesture. But the Vealthari remembered everything. The peace that existed now was real but thin, the kind of peace that needed to be fed carefully or it would stop existing. The political marriage had been proposed by the Vealthari side. Their emperor had 3 daughters. The third, Sovereign, was a diplomat and had some experience with what he called difficult negotiations. She would marry a human representative. The gesture would mean something, the emperor said. It would signal commitment. The coalition had spent 4 months choosing Aaron. He had not been their first choice, or their second. Their first choice had declined. Their second had failed a psychological evaluation in a way that the evaluators found alarming. Aaron had been third on the list, and the committee had chosen him because his file said, in 3 separate sections, that he was unusually calm under pressure and difficult to provoke. One evaluator had written a note at the bottom of her report that said simply, "He pays attention to things other people ignore." The committee had not discussed that note. They had approved Aaron and moved on. He finished the water and set the glass down when the main doors opened. The Vealthari delegation entered, and the room went quiet, the way rooms go quiet when something large and powerful walks in. There were 12 of them, all tall, all dressed in formal robes made from a material that caught light in a way no human fabric quite managed. Their skin patterns shifted in soft blues and silvers as they moved, the way nervous or alert Vealthari often glowed. The diplomats in the room watched with the kind of careful attention people give to things they are still slightly afraid of. Aaron watched too, but he watched differently. He was not looking at the robes, or the height, or the light show. He was watching who walked slightly behind whom, who glanced at whom before speaking, who stood close to the princess, and who stood just far enough away to have room to move quickly if something went wrong. He noted 3 of them, whose skin patterns were tighter and more controlled than the others. Guards, not diplomats. Sovereign herself was easy to identify, because she walked as if the floor had been built specifically to hold her. She was tall even by Vealthari standards, with deep violet skin patterns that moved slowly and steadily. The sign of someone who had learned to control their bioluminescence the way a soldier learns to control their breathing. Her face was angular and still. Her eyes were a pale yellow gold, and when they swept the room, they did so the way eyes do when they are not admiring, but assessing. They landed on Aaron. He met her gaze and gave her a small, polite nod. Her expression did not change. Her skin patterns did not change. She looked at him for exactly 2 seconds, then moved her eyes elsewhere. He had been found, checked, and dismissed all at once, quick as a door closing. He was not offended. He had expected it. The ceremony was formal and long, and conducted in 3 languages. Aaron stood where he was told, said what he was told to say, and signed what was put in front of him. Sovereign did the same, with the precise efficiency of someone completing a task on a schedule. When the officiant announced the joining in the Veilthari's spoken tongue, Sovereign's skin briefly flared a soft gold, the traditional Veilthari signal of acknowledgement, and Aaron had to keep his face neutral because he had spent 6 weeks learning basic Veilthari color language from an old research paper, and he knew that the gold acknowledgement flash was considered the absolute minimum acceptable response in a formal ceremony. She had done the equivalent of the smallest possible nod. He filed that information away. At the reception dinner, Sovereign's chief advisor, a tall, older Veilthari named Osavar, sat near Aaron and explained the schedule going forward. Aaron would travel to Veilthara Prime aboard the Imperial ship. He would be given a suite of rooms in the palace. He would attend public functions as required. He would have access to the gardens, the library, and 2 of the 4 residential wings. There was a list of restricted areas. There was also a list of staff he could speak to, and a smaller list of staff he could not. Aaron listened to all of it and asked 2 questions. The first was whether he could request books from outside the library catalog. The second was whether the garden was accessible at night. Osavar had clearly prepared for more complicated questions. He blinked, a very human-looking gesture, though on a Veilthari face it carried a slightly different weight, and said that both were probably fine, and he would confirm in writing. "Thank you," Aaron said, and went back to his food. Across the table, one of the younger Veilthari diplomats leaned toward a colleague, and made a skin pattern that translated roughly as, "Is that really the one they sent?" The colleague responded with the Veilthari equivalent of a shrug. Aaron did not look up from his plate. But he had seen it. The alien princess considered her human husband harmless, until his true power emerged. Part 2. Life Inside the Crystal Palace. Veilthara Prime was a planet that looked like it had been painted by someone who had never seen anything ugly. The sky shifted between pale green and deep amber, depending on the time of day, and the cities were built from living crystal that the Veilthari had been growing and shaping for thousands of years. The Imperial Palace sat at the center of the capital like a heart inside a chest. Vast and humming and old in a way that made human buildings feel like they had been put together last Tuesday. Aaron stood at the window of his suite on his first morning and looked at all of it without saying anything. Then he unpacked his bags, made a list, and got to work. The list was not dramatic. It did not say things like uncover palace secrets or build spy network. It said things like learn the names of the staff on this floor, find out where the palace maintenance tunnels run, locate secondary communication points, get a copy of the palace layout if possible, ask about the garden schedule. It was the kind of list a careful, quiet person writes, the kind that looks like nothing and means everything. Sovereign visited his suite on the second day for exactly 11 minutes. She asked if the rooms were acceptable. He said they were very comfortable, thank you. She asked if he needed anything adjusted. He said he would love a second bookshelf if it was not too much trouble. She looked at him the way someone looks at a puzzle they are not particularly interested in solving, said she would have one sent up, and left. The bookshelf arrived the next morning. Aaron filled it within a week. He read everything he could find about the Veilthari, about the palace, about the history of the empire. He read old diplomatic records and engineering catalogs and agricultural reports from the outer systems. He read a 400-year-old account of how the palace crystal had been seeded and grown, written by the architect who designed it, and he took notes on which sections of the structure had been added in later centuries and which were original. He was also learning the language, not just the spoken form, which he already had a foundation in. He was learning the color shift dialect, the bioluminescent language that the Velthari considered the emotional truth beneath their words. He had found 3 research papers written by human linguists who had tried to catalog it, and he studied them carefully. He could not replicate the patterns on his own skin. He was human. He had no bioluminescence. But he was building a reading vocabulary. He wanted to understand what was being said around him that no one thought he could understand. He met Riva on his 4th day at the palace. She was a junior engineer on the maintenance staff, responsible for monitoring the crystal growth rates in the East Residential Wing. She was young by Velthari standards, with pale green skin patterns that flickered nervously when she accidentally walked into Aaron in one of the lower corridors. She dropped her tools. He helped her pick them up. She seemed confused by this. He introduced himself by name, and she looked at him as if no one in the palace had done that to her before, which he suspected was close to the truth. He asked her what she was working on. She told him, haltingly, about the East Wing crystal that had developed a small structural resonance issue. Nothing dangerous, but annoying, and nobody senior had time to look at it. Aaron asked if he could see the readings. She showed him. He looked at them for a while and asked 2 quiet questions about the palace's internal frequency system, which he had read about in the architect's old account. His questions were good ones. Riva looked at him differently after that. She started talking, and once she started, she did not really stop. Over the following weeks, Aaron spent time in the maintenance corridors and the staff kitchens and the small rest areas where the lower caste palace workers took their breaks. He always listened more than he spoke. He never asked for anything that seemed important. He asked about families, about favorite foods, about what the weather was like in the outer city. He remembered everything people told him. When he saw someone again, he asked follow-up questions. He learned their children's names. He remembered that one of the kitchen staff had a sister in the 3rd outer system who had written home saying the new tax assessment was making things very hard. He learned more in those corridors than most diplomats learned in formal briefings. He learned that the empire was not as stable as it looked. The out-of-systems, 3 of them, all resource-heavy, all taxed at rates the inner court considered reasonable and the outer people considered crushing, were angry in the quiet way that people get angry before something breaks. He learned that Prince Doran, the emperor's eldest son, was popular with the military houses and deeply unpopular with everyone else. He learned that 2 of the 5 imperial houses had never truly supported the peace treaty and had said so in private in language that was not diplomatic at all. He sent everything home in careful encrypted reports built into what looked like routine software update packages. At public functions, he stood beside Sovereign and smiled and shook hands and said the right things. The court continued to find him amusing. They had given him the nickname Soft Step, a Velthari phrase used for creatures that look harmless. He heard it once from a minor noble who did not realize he had learned enough color language to catch it. He smiled and accepted a glass of something that tasted like warm fruit and metal, and he kept smiling while he thought about what he had heard. Sovereign performed her public duties with the same crisp efficiency she gave everything. She was good at her work, genuinely good, not just trained. She could read a room, diffuse tension, redirect conversations with a precision that Aaron respected. She was kind to children at events, not in a performed way, but in a natural one, bending down to their level, without being asked. At 3 separate evening festivals, he noticed she slipped away from the formal areas and went down to the lower residential wings, where the staff and their families lived. He noted that she stayed for an hour each time, and that no one in the court seemed to know she did this. He thought about that more than he let on. One evening, 3 months in, Osavar stopped Aaron in the garden and told him with the particular careful tone of someone being polite, while also being firm. That some members of the court had expressed curiosity about how Aaron filled his days. It was not an accusation. It was a soft reminder that he was being watched. Aaron said he had been reading, mostly, and spending time with the maintenance staff, because he found the crystal growth process genuinely interesting. He said it with the easy manner of a man who had nothing to hide, because he had known since day one that he was being watched and had organized everything he did around that fact. Osavar looked at him for a moment, then said goodnight. Aaron went back to his book. 2 corridors away, in a maintenance access tunnel that appeared on no current palace map, a small secondary communication relay that Aaron had installed 3 weeks ago sent another report home without making a sound. The alien princess considered her human husband harmless until his true power emerged. Part 3. The Night the Palace Burns. The night it happened, the palace was quiet in the way that things go quiet just before they stop being quiet. Aaron had been awake since the 2nd hour past midnight. He was sitting in the small reading chair by the window of his antechamber. Not reading, just thinking. He had noticed something 3 days earlier that he had not been able to set down. A change in the rotation of the palace's internal security staff. A minor adjustment, the kind that would look like routine scheduling to anyone not paying close attention. But Aaron had been tracking the security rotation for 4 months, and the change was not routine. 12 guards who were personally loyal to Prince Doran had quietly moved into positions covering the east and south residential wings. 4 communication relay nodes, not the main ones, the secondary ones, had been put under maintenance restriction, which meant that in an emergency, the backup channels would not function. He had sent a message home that evening. He had also visited Reva and given her a set of very specific instructions, which she had received with the expression of someone who does not fully understand what is happening, but trusts the person talking to them. Then he had come back to his room and sat in the chair, and waited. The palace went dark at the 3rd hour. Not all of it. The main lights stayed on, which made it worse in a way, because it meant someone had been careful. Only the security grid went down. The kind of systems that would tell the Emperor's loyal guards where an intruder was. The kind of systems that would allow doors in the residential wing to be locked from the outside. Aaron heard the locks engage on the main door of his suite. Then he heard them engage on Sovereign's chamber, 2 doors down the hall. He stood up, picked up the bag he had already packed and placed by the chair 3 days ago, and walked through the interconnecting passage that the palace staff used for room service deliveries. It was not locked. It had not been locked, because it was not a door that appeared on the security grid's official map. Aaron had found it during his 2nd week, by asking one of the kitchen staff how the late-night tea service reached the residential suites without disturbing the corridor guards. He entered Sovereign's antechamber from the inside. She was already awake, already moving, already at the weapons rack on the far wall. The rack was empty. Every weapon she owned had been removed sometime during the evening. She turned when she heard him come in, and her hand came up fast. She was a warrior's daughter, and her first instinct was good. She stopped when she saw it was him. Her skin patterns had gone to a sharp, rapid red and silver, that Aaron had learned to read as high alert, high focus, controlled anger. He crossed the room and held out a long secondary blade in a plain leather sheath. "Where did you get that?" she said. Her voice was very level. "The armory in the sub-level maintenance section," he said. "I put in a request for it 6 weeks ago under the category of historical collection items. I described it as decorative." He paused. "It is not decorative." She took it without a word and drew it. It was real and balanced, and she moved it in one short testing arc with the ease of someone who had been training since childhood. Then she looked at him and waited. He told her. All of it. Quickly and in order, the way he had organized it in his head over the past 3 days. The security rotation, the communication nodes, the 12 guards, the maintenance tunnels, Reva and the lock sequence trap she had built into the East Corridor junction, designed to seal 6 guards into a section of hallway with no override from the outside. The 3 house commanders he had been quietly communicating with for the past 2 months through the secondary relay. Loyal commanders who trusted Sovereign and who were right now receiving a signal telling them to move. He told her the 6 names of the staff she needed to trust tonight. Then he told her the 4 names she needed to keep away from the security terminals, because 2 of them were Doran's people, and 2 more were simply frightened enough to do whatever they were told. Sovereign listened to everything. She did not interrupt. She did not ask why he had not told her sooner, though he could see in her color patterns that the question was there. She was a soldier's mind first. The questions could come later. "You have done all of this," she said when he finished. It was not quite a question. "Yes," he said. "While I thought you were reading books in the garden." "I was also reading books in the garden," he said. "There is a lot of time in a day." She looked at him for 1 more second, and then she moved toward the inner passage, and he followed. The next 4 hours were not clean or simple. They moved through the maintenance tunnels, while above them Doran's soldiers took positions in the residential corridors, not yet sure why their sensor feeds had gone strange, and their lock signals were behaving oddly. Aaron had introduced a simple feedback loop into the secondary sensor system 3 weeks ago, something Riva had helped him finish. It did not attack the sensors, it just made them repeat the last 30 seconds of data on a loop, so the guards watching the screens saw stillness, while the real corridors were not still at all. Aaron communicated with the 3 house commanders through a small handheld unit, getting coordinates, timing, updates. He spoke quietly and moved carefully, and never once raised his voice. Sovereign moved beside him, and after the first 10 minutes, she stopped watching him with confusion, and started watching him the way soldiers watch each other in a fight, with the specific trust that comes from watching someone do exactly what they said they would do. There was one moment that nearly came apart. In the lower east corridor, a young Veilthari soldier, barely an adult, his skin patterns cycling through the pale yellows of fear and confusion, had separated from his unit, and was standing alone in a junction with his weapon up, not sure which way to point it. He had not been told which side he was on. Not really. He had been told to report to a captain he had never met, and given a post that nobody explained. Aaron stepped out of the shadow of the maintenance door, alone, without a weapon in his hands. The soldier spun toward him, and Aaron said, in quiet and carefully spoken Veilthari, "You do not want to be here. I can see that. I am not going to tell you what to do. But the junction behind me leads to the staff quarters, where 30 people who have nothing to do with tonight are trying to stay safe. If you want to walk away from this, walk away from them, and I will not report which way you went." The soldier stood very still for a long moment. Then he lowered his weapon and walked the other way. Sovereign had watched from the doorway. She said nothing. By dawn, it was over. Doran was in custody, caught in the north wing by 2 of the house commander's units. The palace was intact. The staff were safe. The emperor was awake and receiving reports in the war room, his skin patterns a deep, unreadable gray. Aaron sat down on a crate in the maintenance tunnel and drank the rest of the water from his bag. Sovereign stood in the entrance of the tunnel and looked at him. The red silver of her alert patterns had faded. What was there now was something he had not seen from her before. He did not have a name for it in either language, but it was not indifference. "I thought you were harmless," she said. "I know," he said. The alien princess considered her human husband harmless until his true power emerged. Part 4. The Weight of a Reputation. The morning after the coup attempt, the palace felt the way a room feels after a loud noise has stopped. Everything was in its place. Everything was technically fine. But the air was different, and everyone knew it. The official account, released by the Palace Communications Office before the second sun had fully risen, described the events as a security incident involving a faction within the imperial household, now resolved. It did not mention Aaron. It did not mention the maintenance tunnels, the secondary relay, the sensor loop, or the young soldier who had walked away from a junction and found himself quietly removed from the records of the night by the same hand that had let him go. The official account was smooth and managed and said as little as possible. The unofficial story was already moving through the palace like water through crystal. Riva had told 2 people. Those 2 people had told 5 others. The kitchen staff, the maintenance crew, the lower-level administrative workers. People who had watched a quiet human with rough hands spend 6 months learning their names and fixing things nobody asked him to fix. They passed the story between them with the careful energy of people who know they are holding something true. The story they told was not complicated. A man had come to their palace, and everyone had looked past him because he was small and human and did not carry a weapon that anyone could see. And when the dark came, he had been the only one in the building who was fully ready for it, because he had spent 6 months paying attention to every single person and corner and crack that everyone else had decided was not worth noticing. By midday, the story had reached the outer residential sections. By evening, it had reached the first relay stations on the outer trade routes. Within a week, it would be in the 3rd outer system, where the tax revolt was already simmering, and where people were very interested in any sign that the Empire's perfect, untouchable structure had cracks in it, and that something outside the court had seen those cracks long before the court had. The court itself was struggling. Osavar sat in his office, with Aaron's intelligence file open on the desk in front of him, and the expression of a man trying to understand how he had read the same document so many times and missed something so large. The file was good. It was thorough. It listed Aaron's service record, his psychological evaluations, his academic history, his physical assessments, all of which described a capable, stable, unusually calm individual. Nowhere in the file did it say what Aaron actually was, because the people who had written it had not had the right category for it. They had measured everything they thought to measure. They had not thought to measure what happened when you put someone with that kind of mind into a situation and gave them 6 months and told everyone around them to look away. 3 of the 5 imperial houses sent private communications to the palace, requesting updated information on the human representative. The requests were politely worded. They were not polite requests. The Emperor received Aaron in his private audience chamber on the 3rd day after the coup. The room was small by palace standards, which still meant it was large, with walls of deep blue crystal that hummed at a frequency Aaron could feel in his back teeth. The Emperor sat in a plain chair, not the throne, not a formal seat, just a chair, and he looked old in the way that very powerful things look old, the way mountains look old. His bioluminescence had faded over the decades to a deep, steady silver, and it barely moved as he watched Aaron take a seat across from him. They looked at each other for a moment. Then the Emperor asked why Aaron had not used what he knew for leverage. He laid it out plainly, because he was old enough to be done with indirect language. Aaron had possessed, for months, intelligence that any serious political operator would have treated as a tool. He had known about the outer system tensions. He had known about the 2 imperial houses whose private language regarding the treaty was not diplomatic. Any one of those pieces of information, properly used, could have shifted the terms of the treaty in humanity's favor, or bought concessions, or built a private network of obligation that would have given the Human Stellar Coalition real leverage inside the Veilthari court for decades. Aaron had used none of it that way. Aaron sat with his hands folded in his lap and thought for a moment before he answered. He said that the staff who had trusted him would have been put at risk if he had played political games with what they shared. He said that Reva had helped him because she believed he was someone worth helping, and that belief was not something he was willing to spend on a treaty clause. He said that the 2 houses whose private language was hostile, he had not reported that information to the coalition, because doing so would have started a chain of events that ended in a harder confrontation, and a harder confrontation meant people getting hurt who had no part in making the decisions that led there. He said that a war, even a winnable one, costs more than an imperfect peace. He said he was not particularly interested in leverage. He was interested in whether the people around him were going to be okay. The emperor was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said slowly that he had been ruling for 60 years, and he had met a great many people who said things like that. Most of them, he said, were either lying or had not yet been tested. Aaron said he understood that. The emperor said, "You have been tested." Aaron said, "Yes." Another silence. The crystal walls hummed. Outside, the capital city went about its morning. He asked whether the human stellar coalition knew what they had sent. Aaron thought about the committee that had chosen him, the list he had been third on, the psychological evaluations, the note at the bottom of the file that he was not supposed to have seen, but had seen anyway, because one of the evaluation staff had left it visible on her screen when she stepped away, and Aaron had read it in the 3 seconds before she came back. The note that said, "He pays attention to things other people ignore." He told the emperor that he thought they had made a good guess, but he was not sure they had fully known. The emperor made a sound that, in Veilthari body language, was the equivalent of a quiet, genuine laugh. His silver patterns shifted briefly to something warmer. Then he stood, which meant the audience was over. At the door, Aaron paused and turned. He told the emperor with respect and without pressure that the outer system tax situation was going to become a real problem within 8 months, if nothing changed. He said it the way someone says something because it is true and someone in the room needs to hear it, not because they are asking for anything in return. The emperor looked at him for a long moment. "I know," the emperor said. Aaron nodded and left. Back on Earth, in a windowless room in the Coalition Intelligence Building, a senior analyst finished reading Aaron's latest report, the one he had sent the morning of the coup, before everything started, and set it down very carefully on the desk. She had been doing this job for 20 years. She read the report twice. Then she said, to nobody in particular, "We sent the right one," in the tone of voice people use when they are both relieved and slightly embarrassed it took them this long to understand why. The report was flagged, filed, and quietly shown to 7 people who needed to see it. The alien princess considered her human husband harmless until his true power emerged. Part 5. What Sovereign Learned. 3 weeks after the night the palace almost came apart, Sovereign woke before dawn and could not go back to sleep. This was not unusual lately. She had always been an early riser, but in the weeks since the coup attempt, the early mornings had taken on a different quality. She would lie in the dark and find her mind moving back through the same corridors it had been moving through for 21 days, looking at things she had walked past without looking at for 6 months. The shelf of books in Aaron's room, the way the maintenance staff spoke to him, the secondary blade, the names of 6 people she should trust, delivered in the dark by a man she had filed under Harmless and largely forgotten. She got up, dressed, and went to the garden. He was already there. Of course he was already there. He was sitting on the low stone bench near the south spire, the one that the crystal moths liked, because the spire gave off a faint warmth that the palace's main heating systems did not quite cover. The moths were clustered near the base of the spire, their wings doing the slow, light-catching movement that made them look like pieces of stained glass, deciding whether to fly. Aaron had a small piece of food in his open hand, and one of the moths was standing on his fingers, eating from his palm, completely unafraid. He looked up when she came down the path. He did not seem surprised to see her. He moved slightly on the bench, which was an invitation, and she sat down at the other end of it. They were quiet for a moment. The sky above Velthara Prime was beginning its slow shift from night blue to the early pale green of morning. Somewhere in the lower city, a bell rang twice. The crystal moth finished eating and lifted from Aaron's hand in a small burst of light and joined the others near the base of the spire. Sovereign said, "I reviewed everything." He waited. She told him what she had reviewed: the maintenance tunnel schematics, which had been given to her by Riva, who had gone over every step of it with the thorough honesty of someone finally allowed to say what they know. The secondary communication relay, and how it worked, and how long it had been running. The trap in the East Corridor Junction, which the palace's chief engineer had examined and described, in his written report, as elegant in its simplicity, and clearly the work of someone who understood the structure of this building at a fundamental level. The intelligence reports Erin had been sending home, which she now had access to through the revised information sharing clause in the new treaty draft. A clause she had been told, 3 days ago, had been quietly suggested by a coalition intermediary 9 months ago, before Erin had even arrived at the palace. She had gone back and found the original treaty draft with the clause handwritten into the margin in small, neat notation. She had looked at the notation for a long time. She had also talked to Riva. She said this last part with a slight change in her tone, not embarrassed exactly, but aware of something. She said she had gone to ask Riva about the trap in the East Corridor, and that Riva had started talking about Erin, and had not really stopped for 40 minutes. She said that Riva had talked about him the way people talk about the first person who ever treated them as if their name mattered. "I did not know her name," Sovereign said. "She has worked in this palace for 4 years. I did not know her name." Erin did not say anything to make her feel better about that. He did not say it was fine, or that it was understandable given her position, or any of the comfortable things that could have been said. He just let it sit, the way honest things sometimes need to sit, before they turn into something useful. Then Sovereign asked him a question she had been building toward for 3 weeks. She asked him what he had actually thought of her in those 6 months, when she had been walking past him and through him and around him as if he were a piece of furniture. What had he seen? He was quiet for a moment. Then he told her. He told her that he had noticed, very early on, that she took her diplomatic work seriously in a way that had nothing to do with performance. That she prepared for every function twice as thoroughly as her staff did, not because she had to, but because she found sloppiness in her own work genuinely uncomfortable. He told her that at the state dinner in the 2nd month, when a minor noble from the 4th house had made a color language comment about one of the kitchen staff, that was unkind in a way that only people who could read the color dialect would catch. Sovereign had shifted the conversation within 4 seconds in a way that left the noble no room to repeat it. She had done it without making a scene. She had done it without anyone noticing, except the kitchen staff member, who had noticed, and who Erin had heard talking about it quietly 3 days later. He told her he had seen her go to the lower residential wing during the festivals. He told her he had noticed she stayed for an hour each time, and that the music there was better, and that she knew that, and went anyway, without telling anyone she was going. He told her he had watched her be kind in the small, unobserved ways that people are kind when they are not performing it. And that he had thought, fairly early on, that the court had no idea who she actually was, and that she had perhaps let them not know, because it was easier. Sovereign was quiet for a long time. Her skin patterns had gone to a slow, deep blue. Not the blue of sadness, but the blue of someone thinking very carefully. She said, "You saw all of that, and you still did not tell me who you were." He said, "You did not ask." "I should have asked." "Yes," he said, without cruelty. "But you had decided already." "Most people do." She looked at the crystal moths for a while. Then she asked him, carefully, as though stepping onto ground she was not sure would hold, whether he would be willing to explain what else he had noticed, not just about the palace, not just about the coup, about everything he had been looking at in the months they had shared a building without sharing anything else. He looked at her. She looked back. "That will take more than one morning," he said. "I am aware," she said. They were still there when the second sun came up and turned the garden gold. In the months that followed, the treaty was renegotiated. Sovereign led the Vielthari side. Erin worked with the coalition team, but what he mostly did was sit across the table from her and watch her work, and sometimes, When a clause was being discussed that had a trap in it that the other side had not seen, he would catch her eye, and she would catch his, and one of them would redirect the conversation, and the trap would not close. They moved like two people who had learned to read each other in the dark, because they had. The new treaty was not perfect. No treaty between two civilizations that large and that different can be perfect. But it was honest, and it was durable, and it was built on something the old one had not had. The understanding that the small, quiet things, the names people forget to learn, the doors no one bothers to map, the person standing in the room that everyone has decided is not worth watching, are exactly the things that decide how everything else goes. Riva was promoted. She said she did not want to leave the maintenance work, so she was given the title of Senior Structural Engineer and a small budget and a room near the South Spire, which she accepted without fuss. On Earth, the senior analyst in the windowless room read the final report from Vialthera Prime, closed the file, and wrote one sentence in the summary field. Recommend we start looking for more people like him. She did not write people like him because she thought there were many. She wrote it because she thought the most important thing they had stumbled into was not Aaron specifically, but the understanding that the most powerful thing a person can do, in a room full of people who have already decided you are nothing, is to prove them right long enough to matter.